Okay, so this brings us to the next bit of information, and that's the cellular responses to the hormones. Um, and so every time a hormone is released, you don't have the exact same response from a cell. It varies, and there are two things that can cause this variation, and that is the number of receptors present and the responses of these hormones um, with other hormones or their interactions between these hormones. And so let's go ahead. So what we're looking at here are two different terms called upregulation and downregulation. And whenever we break this down to its like simplest form, what this is referring to is, has the cell made more receptors for a hormone or made less receptors for a hormone? And so if a cell is responding to maybe a particular hormone, or it could be due to many different things. The book mentions response to reduced hormone concentrations, and so it responds to reduced hormones by upregulating its receptors to make it more sensitive, but it could be other reasons as well. But if a cell upregulates its hormone receptors, it simply just produces more receptors for those hormones, and so very small fluctuations or raises in that hormone level could end up resulting in stronger reactions from that cell. Whereas typically in response to very high hormones or high hormone levels, the cell might downregulate its number of receptors, and downregulation is just reducing the number of receptors, and it reduces the effects of those hormones. Sometimes this is called or referred to, or students think of it similarly to like tolerance. And so if the cell becomes more tolerant to those hormones, and so it would decrease the number of receptors, and so there wouldn't be a strong response from hormone levels. So for example, like insulin resistance can happen where cells maybe don't respond to insulin even if insulin is being produced properly by the pancreas, and this could end up resulting in high levels of blood sugar. And then the second thing that can affect the responses from cells are the interactions on one cell between different receptors. And so imagine that there are dozens of different types of hormones, and there are dozens of different types of receptors. And so these receptors are they could be found in the same cell. They could be found all over the place. So there are three main responses that we talk about, and that's synergistic, permissive, and antagonistic. So I'm going to go ahead and give you all some examples of some cells that maybe would have synergistic permissive, or I'll define these terms for you. So a synergistic response is whenever two hormones, and so in this case we've got estrogen and progesterone, these two hormones are going to intensify their responses to each other. So like for example, if we're talking about a female's menstrual cycle, or uterine cycles, every month the uterus gets a thicker functional layer. The inner layer of the uterus gets a little bit thicker. In its response to both of these hormones together, making it a more intense signal. One hormone itself will adjust or modify the layer of the uterus, but both of them thicken it and increase the amount of blood flow going to it. So it intensifies, and that's called a synergistic response. It's got this root word syn in front of it, and these things are going to be working with each other or in cooperation. Another one is permissive. And so what we've listed here are oxytocin and prolactin, and this example is both hormones are needed to have one result. So for example, if we're talking about lactation, lactation has two things that have to occur. One, you have to have milk, and two, the milk has to be ejected. And so you can't lactate without both of these things occurring. So prolactin is responsible for helping the breast produce milk, and oxytocin is responsible for helping eject the milk. So both of these things have to happen together, and so it's a permissive response. If both of them aren't present, then you don't have the action. And then the last one that we talk about is antagonistic. And antagonistic is an example of whenever both of these things work in opposition to each other. So your pancreas produces well, it produces multiple hormones, but the two main hormones that the pancreas produces are glucagon and insulin. And so these two hormones together are going to affect blood sugar levels. Glucagon is going to work to raise blood sugar, and insulin is going to work to lower blood sugar. And so, um, for example, if you have like a liver cell or an adipose cell with receptors for both of these hormones, if one hormone is being produced in a much greater magnitude than the other, then you're going to result in having that response. And so these hormones are going to interact with each other at the target cells. So there are some questions. Here are some questions for y'all, and y'all can go ahead and y'all can start looking at these in the discussion board. So look at or respond to in discussion board. And y'all can bring these up. This is one of those things where this is like a question I can pose for y'all, and everybody's going to be able to just, whoever the first one is probably going to post the right answers. But it gives y'all something that y'all can start doing to help with that discussion board. So this last section of the chapter is just talking about various glands. I'm not going to go into many different glands, and actually whenever it's the test or for the test, I ask or talk primarily about what everything previous to now. So what I'm going to actually do is let y'all look these up yourselves, because essentially I'm going to end up reading the slides to y'all, and I know that's kind of boring. I don't have a lot of additional information to add in. So go ahead and look at these. Whenever we are going, or I'm making the test, I'm not going to focus in and ask a lot of very specific, detailed, difficult questions about this material. So I'm just going to scan through it real quick to highlight some important things, but I'm not going to go through and repeat this again, especially since we've talked about it in lab, and a lot of it is just kind of simple information. So a list of the hormones available for y'all. Y'all can pause and just see. One thing I'll stress or point out to y'all is it uses the term tropic hormones, and a tropic hormone is a hormone that's going to stimulate the release of another hormone. So, for example, thyroid hormone releasing hormone is going to stimulate thyroid stimulating hormone, and the corticotropin releasing hormone is going to end up resulting in the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, and gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the release of your gonadotropins, etc. And so here's an image that kind of summarizes that, and so y'all can pause the video and y'all can go through, or you can look at your PowerPoint and you can just see all of the different hormones. And so here is the hormone coming from your hypothalamus, and this is going to end up resulting in these different hormones from your pituitary gland, which will result in many different responses at your target cells. So I'll let y'all just look through this. This is mostly just an interesting slide. Some students asked some questions, so I threw this together. I'm not going to really ask y'all anything on the test about this, but it's available for y'all. And same thing with this slide. It's just some information about a disorder. So the thyroid gland is it's a gland that helps regulate your body's metabolism. In order to produce thyroid hormone, you need iodine. With an iodine deficiency, people can end up having retardation, cretinism, goiters, and so like retardation and cretinism could occur for babies that are born without much iodine. So the next gland is the thyroid gland. It's a very vascularized gland. It helps maintain your body's metabolism. And so there is a process that thyroid hormone is produced, and it's listed right here where the thyroid hormones are produced. I'll let y'all read this. It's just a series of steps, but I wouldn't stress about it for the exam. And here is your adrenal gland. It shows the different regions. Again, this is something that you can just read these highlights here. I wouldn't stress about knowing a whole lot about it for the exam. Um, and then cortisol is the hormone released by your pituitary gland, or I mean your adrenal gland. I wouldn't stress too much about this slide either. And then the last organ that we talk about is the pancreas. The pancreas is a very important organ. It has two main functions. It functions as an endocrine gland and also an exocrine, which means, so endocrine is it produces hormones that circulate through the body, and exocrine means it's going to produce some things and pump it into a duct and deliver it to a location. So in the endocrine chapter, we're obviously worried about the endocrine gland. There are two primary hormones that the pancreas produces, and that's insulin and glucagon, and these come from beta and alpha cells respectively. Insulin has a very important effect of reducing the body's blood sugar or uptaking nutrients to the cells, and glucagon is antagonistic. It opposes those effects. And so it releases the nutrients into the blood or raises blood sugar levels. And so y'all can pause it on here. What this does is it goes into more detail about what I just said. So this example shows how insulin release ends up causing tissues to bring in sugar or uptake sugar. Whereas glucagon is going to end up resulting, whenever it's released, it leads to the release of nutrients. And so you can see these black arrows right here are indicating the direction of nutrient movement, whether it's going into the bloodstream or if it's being uptaken or put into the cells. And so that's it. Go ahead and watch the videos. Hopefully, if you've gotten to this point, you've watched the videos. And let me know if you have any questions. Okay.